They fined me because my lawn was too green. Yes, you heard that right. My lawn looked too healthy for the neighborhood. They said it looked fake. And that was the start of the most ridiculous battle I have ever had with my HOA. Let me rewind to how it all began. It was mid-spring, the kind of week when the weather is perfect. Warm sun, light breeze, and every lawn in the neighborhood starts showing off, except ours looked better. I had just replaced the sprinkler system, added new turf mix, and spent weekends aerating and feeding it right. My grass looked like it belonged on a golf course. I was proud of it. Neighbors walking their dogs would slow down just to ask, "What fertilizer do you use?" I would laugh and tell them it was just care and timing, but a few people were not too happy. Mainly the HOA president, Carol. You know the type. Sunglasses always perched on her head, clipboard in hand, ready to pounce on anything that did not fit her vision of uniform community standards. At first, she complimented me. "Oh, your lawn looks so lush," she said, but the tone carried that fake sweetness, the kind that really means, "I am looking for a reason to hate this." I brushed it off. Until a week later, I got a letter in my mailbox. It was a violation notice. "Artificial turf not allowed in front yards," it said. Fine, $250. I almost laughed. Artificial turf? My grass was real. I even had soil samples to prove it. I called the HOA office thinking it had to be some mistake. The clerk said, "Well, the board inspected and concluded it does not appear natural." I said, "Do you mean it looks too good to be real?" She paused and said, "That is one way to put it." That line stayed in my head. Too good to be real. I walked outside and looked at my lawn like it had betrayed me. The blades swayed softly in the afternoon sun, all natural, all grown with my own effort. And yet, the HOA had decided to fine me because my work made the neighborhood look bad. Now, if it had just been one letter, I might have let it go. But a few days later, I received another one. This time it said the shade of green was inconsistent with community aesthetics. Another $150 fine. I knew what was going on. Carol's lawn looked like it was suffering from a drought, brown patches everywhere, and she hated that mine looked better. I started digging, literally. I went out with a small shovel and took soil samples from my yard and from the common grass strip maintained by the HOA. Then I took pictures. Close-ups showing the texture, the blades, everything. I even recorded a video with my garden hose showing water soaking into the soil. Then I went to the next HOA meeting, the kind where they sit around a folding table, pretending they are running a government. Carol was sitting in the center, smiling like a cat who had already caught the mouse. When my turn came to speak, I walked up with a folder. "I am here about violation number 1472, alleged artificial turf," I said. Carol tilted her head. "Yes, we received multiple complaints about that lawn." "Multiple complaints?" I asked. "From whom?" She said, "We cannot disclose that." "Of course you cannot," I said, "because the only person complaining is sitting right in front of me." The room went quiet. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I could feel their eyes bouncing between me and Carol. Then I pulled out my photos. "This is my lawn. This is your HOA-maintained grass. You can literally see the soil moisture. Mine absorbs water. Yours puddles up because it is compacted and dry. Would fake turf do that?" Carol frowned. "It still appears unnatural in color," she said. "Maybe that is because it is healthy," I shot back. "I followed your own maintenance guidelines to the letter." And that was when I dropped the stack of printed HOA bylaws on the table. Rule 7, Section 3. Residents are encouraged to maintain healthy green lawns consistent with seasonal conditions. It does not say anything about how green is too green. She went red. The other board members whispered among themselves. One of them, Dan, tried to play peacemaker. "Maybe we should review the inspection notes," he said. Carol glared but nodded. "Fine, we will review them." I left that meeting with a smirk. I knew they had nothing. But something told me this was not over. Carol looked too stubborn to admit defeat. Sure enough, 2 days later, I got another letter. This one said, Pending reevaluation of the lawn's authenticity, fines remain valid. That was when I realized this was not just about my lawn. This was about power. Carol wanted control, and my green grass had become her symbol of defiance, so I made a plan. If she wanted to play the authenticity game, I was going to take it to a whole new level. I called up a local horticulture professor I knew from community college. He specialized in turf science. I told him everything. He laughed and said, "They are fining you for healthy grass? That is absurd. I would love to test it." Perfect. I invited him over for a soil and blade analysis. He brought lab kits, moisture sensors, and a fancy little spectrometer. My next-door neighbor watched with wide eyes as we set up. "Man," he said, "you are really going for it." "Oh, I am," I replied, "because next meeting I am bringing science." As we wrapped up, the professor handed me a small envelope with the preliminary results. "Your lawn is 100% natural," he said. "And by the way, whoever maintains it, they are doing it right." I smiled. That was all I needed. Next HOA meeting was in 3 days. I could hardly wait. And as I printed out the lab report that night, I thought, they said it looked fake. But soon, everyone would know just how real it was. The day of the meeting, I woke up earlier than usual. The morning sun hit my window, lighting up that perfect green view of my front yard, my so-called fake lawn. I looked out, sipped my coffee, and thought, all right, Carol, game on. I had my evidence packed neatly in a folder, photos, soil test results, and that lab report signed by a turf science professor. I even printed a few color charts to show the range of natural green shades under sunlight. My wife joked, "You are about to walk in there like some kind of lawn lawyer." I laughed, but she was right. That meeting was my courtroom, and my grass was Exhibit A. When I arrived at the clubhouse, it was already buzzing. You could feel that weird tension in the air, the kind that usually means something juicy is about to go down. A few neighbors nodded at me, whispering to each other. Word had spread that the green lawn guy was about to confront the board. Carol sat at the center of the table, her usual spot, arms crossed, lips tight. The rest of the board looked half bored, half nervous. Dan, the reasonable one, gave me a small nod. When my name was called, I stood up, walked to the front, and laid my folder down. "This is about my alleged artificial lawn," I said calmly. Carol's voice came sharp. "Yes, we are aware of your issue. As stated in prior notices, your lawn remains under review." "Under review," I repeated slowly. "You mean you are still pretending you can tell a real blade of grass from a plastic one?" A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Carol's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Green," she always called me that, even though my last name is not Green. "We have several reports from community members that your lawn's color and texture are inconsistent with natural turf." "Several reports?" I said. "Or one report written by the same hand with the same bad handwriting?" That got another wave of quiet laughter. I opened the folder and held up a photo of my lawn under sunlight, side by side with the HOA's own community grass. "See this?" I said, pointing. "That is natural soil, natural moisture retention, and natural chlorophyll saturation. You can even see the dew reflecting sunlight. Would fake turf have dew?" Carol tried to speak, but I raised my hand. "I am not done. You fined me $250, then $150, claiming my lawn was artificial. You said the color looked fake, so I brought proof. Not from Google, not from a store receipt, from a certified horticulture expert from the local university." I slid the report across the table. "This," I said, "is a full turf analysis. My grass is 100% Kentucky bluegrass mixed with perennial rye, the same mix recommended by your own HOA landscaping guidelines." Silence. The room went so quiet that you could hear the air conditioner hum. Dan leaned over, reading the report. He looked impressed. "This is actually really thorough," he said. Carol glanced at it but avoided meeting my eyes. "We still have to verify authenticity," she muttered. I smiled. "You can verify all you want. The lab number is on the report. Call them. I even gave you their business card." A man from the back, my neighbor Rick, spoke up. Wait, so you were telling me they fined you because your lawn looked too good? I nodded. Exactly. Rick shook his head. Man, that is ridiculous. My yard looks like a desert and they have never said a word. That started a murmur across the room. People were whispering about unfair rules, favoritism, and how the HOA seemed to go after certain homeowners more than others. You could see Carol getting flustered. I decided to press on. You know what this is really about? I said, turning slightly toward the audience. It is not about rules. It is about who the rules apply to. I keep my lawn nice and suddenly it is a problem, but the vice president's mailbox has been leaning sideways for 6 months and no one says a thing. A few people laughed louder this time. Carol's face turned red. This is not the place for personal attacks, she snapped. Oh, it is not an attack, I said. It is an observation. At that point, the tension was so thick you could slice it with a shovel. Carol shuffled her papers and tried to move to the next topic, but I was not done. I would also like to request that all fines against me be revoked immediately, I said, and that the board issue a written statement confirming that my lawn meets HOA standards. Dan looked at the others. Honestly, I do not see a reason to deny that. The report is solid. Carol glared at him. We should vote on it. So they did. 5 board members total. Carol was the only one who voted against. The motion passed 4-1. I could have stopped there. I could have walked out with my little victory. But something in me wanted to go one step further. I wanted to make sure this nonsense never happened again, to me or anyone else. So I said, before we move on, I have one more question. How exactly did this inspection happen? Because I never saw anyone take samples or knock on my door. Did someone just eyeball it from the street? No answer. Carol stared at her notes like they were suddenly fascinating. Dan cleared his throat. We, usually rely on community reports for initial assessments. So anyone can report anything without proof? I asked. He nodded slowly. Technically, yes. I turned back to the room. You hear that? Someone could report your garden gnome as offensive, and you would get a fine before you could blink. That hit home. Several people started talking all at once, agreeing, some even raising their hands to speak. Carol was losing control of the meeting. That was when I realized something bigger was happening. This was not just about my lawn anymore. This was about how the HOA operated. The unchecked power, the lazy enforcement, the personal vendettas hidden behind bylaws. As the meeting wound down, Carol abruptly ended it. We will revisit policy procedures next session, she said through gritted teeth. I gathered my folder, nodded to the crowd, and said, Thank you for your time. As I walked out, a few neighbors stopped me in the hallway. Man, that was awesome, one said. You really called them out. Another said, You should run for the board next election. I laughed it off, but the idea stuck in my head. When I got home, my wife was waiting on the porch. How did it go? She asked. I looked back at my perfect green lawn, shining under the porch light. Let us just say, I said, they will think twice before calling real grass fake again. But deep down, I knew it was not over. Carol was not the kind of person who took public embarrassment lightly. And the next move she made? Well, it took things from absurd to downright unbelievable. The next week, I thought everything had finally settled. My fines were gone, my name cleared, and my lawn looked better than ever. Neighbors started stopping by just to admire it, some even asking for tips. For a minute, I actually believed that was the end of it. But with Carol? Oh no, it was only halftime. A few mornings later, I found a new letter taped to my door. Same HOA header, same tone, but this time the words hit harder. Your property may be in violation of community water conservation policy. Excessive watering suspected. I almost laughed. Excessive watering? Are you kidding me? I said out loud. My wife peeked out from the kitchen. They are still at it, huh? Apparently, when you win one round with the HOA, they try to find another rule to trip you up. So I decided to play smarter. I grabbed my coffee, sat down at my desk, and pulled up every HOA policy document I had. It was time to learn their rulebook better than they did. Turns out, the water conservation policy was from 5 years ago during a temporary drought season, and it had already expired. No one had updated it since. In other words, the rule they were citing did not even exist anymore. I almost wanted to frame that discovery, but instead, I went bigger. I started collecting every recent notice, every HOA memo, every petty fine neighbors had mentioned. I created a folder on my laptop labeled HOA Inconsistencies, and it filled up fast. By the end of the week, I had enough material to write a small book. And the more I read, the clearer it became. The HOA board was breaking their own bylaws left and right. No meeting minutes filed, no signatures on some fines, even missed deadlines for appeal responses. They were basically policing the neighborhood while ignoring the rules they were supposed to follow. So, I made a plan. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. I spent that whole afternoon preparing a short presentation. Nothing fancy, just facts, screenshots, timelines, and side-by-side comparisons. I printed a copy for every board member and stapled them neatly. My wife watched me pack it all into a binder and said, "You are going full detective again, huh?" I grinned. "No," I said. "This time I'm going full auditor." When I arrived at the meeting, the room was even more packed than before. I guess people wanted to see round two. Carol looked uneasy the second I walked in. You could practically see the stress in her forced smile. I waited my turn while they went through boring stuff, landscaping budgets, pool maintenance, new mailbox colors, and then my name came up. Carol sighed. "Mr. Green. Again with that name. You have requested to address the board again regarding your lawn." "Actually," I said, standing, "this is not about my lawn. It is about yours." You could feel everyone perk up. I walked to the front and opened my binder. "See, after last time, I started reading through our HOA bylaws. Turns out our board has been a little careless." Carol stiffened. "Careless how?" "Well," I said, flipping a page. "For starters, meeting minutes have not been publicly posted for 6 months. That is a violation of Section 3, Clause B. Also, according to the budget records, fines collected for the past quarter were supposed to be disclosed to members, but the report is missing." I turned another page. "Oh, and the water policy? Expired 3 years ago. You fined me based on a rule that no longer exists." You could almost hear the gasps ripple through the room. People started whispering. Dan leaned forward, clearly uncomfortable. "Is that true?" he asked Carol. Carol's lips tightened. "We have had delays due to clerical issues," she said quickly. "Clerical issues," I repeated. "Like missing signatures, unrecorded votes, and fines sent without approval? Because I have copies of those too." I handed out packets to the board members. You could see them flipping pages, reading quietly. Some looked surprised, others embarrassed. "This is not an attack," I said calmly. "This is accountability. You fine people for breaking rules, while the board itself has been ignoring them." A woman from the crowd raised her hand. "Wait. So if the fines were not properly approved, are they even valid?" "Good question." Carol's face flushed bright red. "We will review all documents and make corrections where necessary," she muttered. But it was too late. The damage was done. The room was alive now. People whispering, murmuring, some even standing to ask questions. It was like watching a dam break. One man said, "I got fined for leaving my garbage cans out one night. Can I get that money back?" Another said, "We should have a re-election if the board cannot follow their own rules." And then, to top it off, Dan spoke up. "Honestly," he said, "maybe we do need new leadership." Carol looked like she wanted to melt through the floor. That was my cue to wrap it up. I closed my binder and said, "All I wanted was fairness. I have no problem following the rules, as long as they apply to everyone equally." Then I looked right at Carol and added, "Even the ones making them." The meeting ended in chaos. People gathered in small circles, talking, shaking hands, patting my shoulder. Some thanked me for finally saying what everyone had been thinking. A few even joked that I should run for president next term. As I walked home under the streetlights, I could hear the sprinklers turning on across the neighborhood. A soft, steady rhythm. My own lawn shimmered again, fresh and green reflecting the light. My wife was waiting at the porch with 2 cups of lemonade. She smiled and said, "So? How did round 2 go?" I took a sip, sighed, and smiled. "Let us just say," I said, "they will be reading the rulebook twice before sending another fine." Later that week, a community email went out. The board announced temporary restructuring, and Carol's name was missing from the leadership list. Dan had stepped in as acting president. The note also mentioned a policy audit and refund reviews for improperly issued fines. I just sat there at my computer, smiling. No smugness, no gloating, just a quiet satisfaction that fairness had finally won. A few days later, I was mowing my 2-green lawn when Rick, my neighbor, waved from across the street. "Hey man," he yelled. "Nice work taking down the HOA boss." I laughed. "Nah," I said. I just reminded them who the rules were really for. And as I looked around at all the lawns, all the homes that suddenly seemed a little freer, I thought, maybe this neighborhood was finally starting to grow right. That is how I proved the grass really was greener, on my side.